Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will carry us into a question that has lingered at the edges of human curiosity for thousands of years. Are we living in a shared dream? A thought both delicate and profound, like a lantern glowing behind a thin curtain. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy these late-night wanderings through the mysteries of existence. And when you're ready, feel free to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. I'm always amazed by the small constellation of time zones that gather here, each person drifting in at a different hour, yet meeting in the same quiet moment. If you haven't already, dim the lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan for a soft background hum, or let the night breeze settle against your window. Allow yourself to slow down. Let your mind loosen its grip just a little. And if your thoughts begin to wander along the way, that's perfectly fine. Let them drift. This story will stay with you, unfolding quietly in the background. Now, when you're comfortable, we can begin our gentle exploration into the possibility that the world around you, this very moment, might be part of a dream that many of us share. There is a certain stillness that arrives in the late hours of the night, a softness that seems to wrap itself around the edges of things. Colours dim a little, sounds lower themselves, and your thoughts begin to float with a slower rhythm, as if the world has finally let go of its daytime urgency. It is in this tender space that questions long buried by noise can resurface, rising like quiet bubbles from the deep. One of them drifts to the surface now. What if everything around you is not as solid as it appears? Imagine for a moment that reality is not a rigid structure, but something more like a film projected onto a curtain. The curtain is thin, delicate, slightly trembling in a breeze you cannot feel. What you call the world appears upon it, the furniture in your room, the people you speak with, the morning routines you repeat without thinking. All of it seems steady, predictable, dependable, and yet, every so often the curtain flickers, just a little. Just enough to make you wonder. Maybe you've had a moment where you paused in a hallway and felt a strange familiarity, as if you had stood in that same place in some earlier forgotten dream. Or maybe you've experienced déjà vu so vivid that it felt like time itself had folded softly over an old memory. These moments pass quickly, but they leave a faint echo behind them, a whisper that asks, how well do we truly know the world we move through? If you step a little closer to this question, gently, without fear, you might begin to notice something quietly astonishing. The world you experience is not the world itself, but a reconstruction made by your mind. Sight, sound, touch. Each of them is not a direct encounter with reality, but an interpretation, a translation. A dream woven out of signals your brain receives and reshapes. When you look at a candle, you're not truly seeing the flame itself, but rather the way your mind translates the light entering your eyes into an inner image. Your brain paints the world for you, stroke by miniature stroke, faster than any artist's hand could ever move. And this painter works constantly, even when you're not aware of it. It fills in missing details, smooths over gaps, and sometimes guesses at what should be there before you even look. Think of those moments when you misheard a word in conversation, only to realize your mind had inserted the meaning it expected. Or the times when you looked at a shadow in the corner and for a heartbeat, imagined a shape that wasn't there. These are gentle reminders that the world inside your mind is not a perfect mirror of the world outside it. It is more like a soft watercolour, subtly altered by expectation, memory and imagination. Once you begin to notice this, The idea of life being dreamlike doesn't seem so far away. Not in the sense that everything's imaginary or unreal, but in the sense that your experience is always filtered, shaped, and lightly edited by the quiet machinery behind your eyes. Whether you're awake or asleep, the same silent storyteller within your mind is working, stitching pieces of the world together into a seamless narrative. But tonight, we're not simply asking whether you are dreaming. The question that draws us deeper is whether this might be a shared dream, one that millions of us are weaving together at the same time. And for that, we must look not only at the private dream world inside your sleeping mind, but also at the subtle ways people across the world seem to share flashes of the same symbols, the same stories, even the same strange moments of recognition. Before we go further, sit with the thought that your experience of reality is already soft, already shaped by layers of memory and interpretation. The world feels solid because your mind presents it that way. But just beneath that solidity lies a gentle fluidity, a dreamlike softness waiting to be noticed. As you breathe slowly, let that idea settle. Let it loosen the edges of the room around you. If your mind begins to drift, simply follow it for a moment. This journey is not about forcing understanding, but allowing curiosity to guide you, not with urgency, but with the quiet wonder of someone peeking behind a curtain for the first time, watching the shadows dance in a way that feels both familiar and entirely new. When you feel ready, we can continue our slow descent into the deeper layers of how the mind constructs the world, and why those constructions might be more connected to one another than we ever imagined. There is a gentle truth about the human mind that often goes unnoticed, not because it is hidden, but because it is always there, so constant that we almost forget to look at it. Every moment you are awake, your brain is quietly at work behind the scenes, crafting the world you think you see. It is not simply receiving information like a camera or a microphone. It is shaping, sculpting, guessing, and sometimes even dreaming while your eyes remain open. And perhaps the softest, most astonishing part of all this is that your brain does most of its work before it receives the full picture from the outside world. Imagine, if you will, a painter sitting before a vast canvas. But instead of waiting for the world to reveal itself, this painter begins with broad strokes, anticipating shapes, expecting colours, filling in shadows before light has a chance to touch them. That painter is your brain. From the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment sleep gathers you again, it is predicting what you will see, hear, and feel long before the sensations actually arrive. Scientists often describe this as a prediction machine, but for our journey tonight, it may be more comforting to think of it as a quiet artist working tirelessly behind the curtain of your awareness. Consider something as simple as walking through your home in the dark. You already know where the door frame is, where the table stands, where the soft edge of your sofa rests. Even with almost no visual input, your brain reconstructs the room from memory, laying out its shapes in your mind so you can move with surprising ease. If a chair has been moved without your knowledge, your shin might discover it before your eyes do. This little collision is not just clumsiness. It is the moment your brain's prediction collides with reality. In that brief sting of surprise, you feel the edges of your mind's artwork meeting the true outlines of the world. Something similar happens when you listen to a conversation in a noisy cafe. You might miss a word here and there, but your brain fills in the blanks automatically, supplying the meaning it expects. If someone says, "Could you pass me the..." and you know they're holding a slice of bread, your mind might automatically complete the sentence with butter, even if they were about to say napkin. The prediction comes first, the correction comes after. It is a dance that repeats every second of your life, a delicate balance of guesswork and adjustment. This gentle guessing is not a flaw. It is the very mechanism that allows you to move gracefully through a world full of uncertainty. Without it, every sound would startle you, every sight would freeze you, every spoken word would have to be decoded from scratch. Your mind softens the world smoothing its edges so you don't have to struggle with the raw data. In a way, you are already dreaming, just dreaming with your eyes open. One of the most striking examples of this comes from optical illusions. When you see two lines that appear unequal in length, even though they're perfectly the same, you are witnessing your brain's predictions overriding the actual sensory information. Your brain is not trying to deceive you. It is simply leaning on patterns it has learned over a lifetime, painting the image the way it believes it should be. When you see a shadow and mistake it for an animal, or when you spot a familiar face in a crowd only to realize you were wrong, you're feeling the gentle tug of your brain's expectations guiding your experience. And this process doesn't stop with shapes or sounds. It affects your sense of time, your feeling of space, even your perception of self. The flow of time itself, this quiet forward movement you feel from one moment to the next, is partially constructed by the mind. If you have ever felt a moment stretch impossibly long, or an hour vanish in what feels like minutes, you have experienced the elasticity of this inner clock. It is less like a mechanical ticking device, and more like a flowing river your mind keeps smoothing and redirecting. All of this leads to a soft and intriguing possibility. If your brain is predicting much of what you perceive, then your experience of reality is not a hard, unchanging surface. It is a constantly updated painting, shaped by expectation, memory, emotion, and sensory hints. A gentle hallucination kept in check by the world outside your window. This is not to say that reality is imaginary. Far from it. Instead, it means that the world you experience is a collaboration, a partnership between the signals your senses gather and the interpretations your mind applies. When you see a tree, you're not seeing it exactly as it is. You're seeing your mind's best version of it. Its colour, its shape, its meaning, all framed by what your memories and predictions suggest. This same machinery that constructs your waking reality also constructs your dreams at night. The difference is that in dreams, the world outside falls silent. Without incoming signals to guide the painter, your mind becomes free to rearrange memories, images, and feelings however it wishes. A hallway becomes endless. A voice from childhood returns. A familiar face merges with a stranger's. The painter creates without boundaries, using the same brush it uses during the day, just dipping it into a different kind of light. This gentle overlap between dreaming and waking is what makes the idea of a shared dream so intriguing. If each of us is already experiencing a world painted from within, then perhaps the shared aspects of reality, the things we all agree upon, are the parts of the painting we have learned to smooth in similar ways. The sky is blue not only because light scatters in a certain pattern, but also because our minds share the same biological brushstrokes, shaped by evolution. A smile is understood as warmth not only through cultural learning, but through shared emotional wiring passed down through countless generations. And so, as we sit in the quiet of this night, it becomes easier to imagine reality as something both internal and collective, something dreamlike, yet stable enough for us to navigate together. When we consider how much of our world is constructed within, and how much is shared between us, the line between dreaming and waking becomes softer, more blurred, more beautiful. If your mind has begun to drift, that is perfectly all right. Let the thoughts settle gently, like dust floating in a beam of moonlight. When you're ready, we can drift a little deeper into the ancient stories and timeless questions that have circled this idea long before science had the language to explore it. When night finally folds itself around you and the world outside grows quiet, something remarkable begins to happen inside your mind. The familiar rhythm of your thoughts softens, your senses retreat from their busy daytime duties, and the quiet painter within your brain begins to work with a very different palette. It is during these hours, when consciousness loosens its grip, that your mind reveals a second world, one that feels vivid, emotional, and strangely solid, even though it is built entirely from within. Dreams have a gentle way of blurring the line between what is imagined and what is real. You may find yourself wandering through a house from childhood, hearing the rustle of curtains you haven't seen in years, or speaking with someone you lost long ago. A simple doorway may open into a vast field that never existed, and you might run without feeling your feet touch the ground. These moments can feel as tangible as any waking memory, and yet they dissolve the moment your eyes open. Still, the emotional imprint lingers, like the echo of a song you can almost remember. What makes dreams feel so real is not the content of the dream, but the machinery that constructs the experience. During dreaming, especially in the phase known as rapid eye movement sleep, your brain activates many of the same networks it uses when you're awake. The regions responsible for vision light up, even though your eyes are closed. The areas that process emotions stir themselves with surprising intensity. Memory fragments drift upward from deeper layers of your mind, blending together in ways that seem to form stories, even when no external world is there to guide them. One way to imagine this is to think of a theatre inside your mind. During the day, the stage is illuminated by the world outside. Sunlight, voices, touch, the presence of other people. But at night, when those sources go dark, the theatre does not close. Instead, the spotlight simply turns inward. Old scenes, unfinished conversations, fears tucked away beneath your thoughts. All of them can step onto the stage. Sometimes they appear as themselves. Sometimes they appear disguised, reshaped into symbols or characters with shifting faces, and your mind, ever eager to make sense of things, begins stitching them together into a story. These stories do not always follow the familiar rules of waking life. Time, stretches, and contracts. Places blend together. You might find yourself in your home one moment and on a distant shore the next, without any sense that something impossible has happened. The dream is not concerned with physics or logic. It is concerned with meaning, with emotion, with the quiet work of processing what you have carried with you throughout the day. Some researchers describe dreams as a kind of emotional housekeeping, a gentle sorting and reorganizing of the thoughts that tug at you beneath the surface. You may have noticed how dreams often highlight feelings more than facts. A small embarrassment from earlier in the day may become a sprawling, surreal scene in your dream, exaggerated into something strange and symbolic. A lingering worry may appear as a darkened hallway or a locked door. A sense of hope may become a rising flight through open sky. These transformations are not random. They are your mind's way of smoothing emotional knots, turning raw feelings into manageable narratives. Sometimes these inner stories even help you solve problems without realizing it. The inventor who dreams of a new design, the writer who wakes with a phrase that completes a chapter, the mathematician who glimpses the shape of a solution. These stories are not myths. They are examples of the dreaming mind finding new connections when the strict logic of the waking world relaxes. It's similar to loosening a tight rope, just enough for it to unwind naturally. And yet, despite their oddness, dreams can feel as real as any moment of your daily life. When you are inside a dream, you do not question its reality. The room feels solid beneath your feet. The voice calling your name sounds genuine. The light on the wall seems steady. This is because your brain uses the same storytelling mechanisms for both waking and dreaming. The difference is not in the machinery, but in the source of the information. In waking life, your senses provide the raw material. In dreaming life, your memories, emotions, and imagination provide it. There is something deeply poetic in this, that the same tools we use to interpret the external world also construct our internal one. The bridge between waking and dreaming is not a sharp boundary, but a soft gradient, a blending of inner and outer worlds. Sometimes, when you wake from a dream that felt especially real, the dream lingers at the edges of your awareness, as if part of it is still unfolding somewhere. a scent, a voice, a place that never existed, all drifting through your mind like ripples on water. It is moments like these that make the idea of living in a dreamlike reality feel less distant. If the mind can construct entire worlds while you sleep, it becomes easier to imagine that your waking life too is a kind of construction, guided more by inner interpretation than by the raw facts of the outer world. This does not diminish the beauty of reality. Instead, it adds a layer of wonder, reminding you that you are both observer and creator. The world you see is not just given to you, it is shaped by you. Dreams also have a way of reminding us that we're not as separate from others as we believe. Many people share similar dream themes: falling, being chased, flying, losing something precious, wandering through labyrinths of shifting rooms. These recurring motifs suggest that the architecture of dreaming is not entirely individual. Somewhere deep within, human beings share similar emotional landscapes, similar concerns, similar hopes. This common ground forms the first faint whisper of the idea that minds may overlap in more ways than we notice. As we let these thoughts settle, it becomes clear why dreaming holds such an important place in the exploration of a shared reality. Dreams are not an escape from the world. They are a reflection of the world filtered through the lens of your inner self. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, the dreams of many can feel strangely aligned, as if touched by the same gentle breeze. Long before modern science began studying consciousness, long before brain scans could trace the soft glow of your thoughts, human beings were already wondering whether the world they saw was truly the world as it is, or simply a gentle illusion shaped by deeper forces. These questions were not whispered in laboratories or debated in textbooks. They were carried by storytellers, poets, philosophers, and wanderers who sat beneath open skies and asked themselves, what is real, and how can I be so sure? One of the oldest and most enduring of these stories comes from the philosopher Plato. More than 2,000 years ago, he imagined a small cave, quiet and dim, where a group of people had lived since birth. Their arms and legs were bound, their heads fixed, facing a blank wall. Behind them, unseen, a fire flickered. Between the fire and the prisoners, figures passed by, carrying everyday objects: cups, bowls, tools, perhaps even small carvings held just high enough for the flames to cast shadows. The prisoners saw only the shadows dancing on the wall. They heard echoes bouncing off the stone. For them, those shadows were the world, because that was all they had ever known. The idea of anything beyond the cave was unimaginable. And if someone were to break free, step outside and see the sunlight for the first time, he would struggle. The light would hurt, the world would feel overwhelming, and he might even prefer the comfort of the shadows he had known all his life. Plato offered this story not as entertainment, but as a gentle warning. He wanted to show that human beings often mistake their interpretations for reality. In a way, we all sit in a cave of our own senses, watching the world not directly, but through layers of perception and interpretation. The shapes you see, the sounds you hear, the meanings you attach to events, all of these are shadows cast by deeper structures you cannot see. And stepping outside the cave, even for a moment, requires the courage to question what feels familiar. This idea resonates even more deeply when you consider what we explored earlier: the brain as a painter, predicting the world before seeing it. Plato's cave becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes an early description of how each mind shapes its own version of the world, how the shadows on your wall may differ slightly from the shadows on someone else's, and yet all of us believe we're seeing the same picture. On the other side of the world, in ancient China, another thinker posed a question just as quiet and profound. The philosopher Zhuangzi, sometimes written as Chuangzi, once dreamt he was a butterfly. He floated on a soft breeze, wings fluttering gently, his body light as a leaf drifting in sunlight. In the dream, he felt completely like a butterfly, as though his human life had never existed. The world around him was simple, peaceful, shimmering. Then he awoke. He was once again Zhuangzi, the philosopher, the thinker, the man. But as he rose from sleep, he wondered, am I a man who dreamt he was a butterfly? Or a butterfly now dreaming that he is a man? His question was not meant to confuse. It was meant to soften the boundary between dreaming and waking. If the sleeping mind can create a world so convincing that we forget ourselves entirely, what certainty do we have that waking life is the final layer of understanding? What if waking life is another kind of dream, one shared collectively, one that feels steady only because we experience it so consistently? Zhuangzi's butterfly dream touches on something that many of us experience even today. Perhaps you've had a dream that felt so real you woke up with a beating heart, still carrying the emotion of it long after the dream faded. Or perhaps you've had a moment during the day where life felt strangely dreamlike, as if everything slowed down just enough for you to glimpse something beneath the surface. These moments echo the ancient question, how do we know which layer of the dream we're in? Plato and Zhuangzi lived worlds apart, separated by language, culture, and centuries of history. And yet, their stories circle the same mystery. Plato's cave asks whether what we see is only a shadow of something deeper. Zhuangzi's butterfly asks whether our identity, our self, is as stable as we believe. Put them together, and a picture begins to form. Reality may be softer, more layered, and more dreamlike than it appears. Even today, these ancient questions have not lost their power. In fact, they feel more relevant than ever. Modern neuroscience tells us that your brain constructs your experience moment by moment, just as Plato described. And your sense of identity, the feeling of being you, is a flexible story shaped by memory, emotion, and awareness, just as Zhuangzi suggested. When viewed this way, both philosophers were touching upon truths that science is only now beginning to explain in gentle, precise language. But there is something else that makes their stories important for our journey. They remind us that questioning reality does not have to be frightening. It can be freeing. It can expand the way you see the world, like stepping out of a small room and discovering a horizon you didn't know was there. It can help you approach your experiences with curiosity rather than certainty, and allow you to soften your grip on the stories you thought were fixed. And perhaps most importantly, these ancient tales invite us to explore the possibility that if reality is a kind of dream, it may not be a solitary one. The cave dwellers, after all, shared the same shadows. The butterfly dream hints at a consciousness that flows between states, not confined to one body or one lifetime. If humans across time and culture have sensed this dreamlike quality, then maybe the dream we live is not entirely ours alone. Allow these thoughts to sit gently with you. There is no need to solve them or hold them tightly. When you're ready, we can drift deeper into the collective symbols and archetypes shared across humanity, echoes of a dream library that seems to belong to all of us. There is a gentle comfort in realizing that many of the thoughts, images, and stories that drift through your mind are not entirely yours alone. They rise from somewhere deeper, a place beneath personal memory, beneath childhood scenes and learned habits, a place that feels older than your individual life. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent much of his life studying dreams, myths, and human behavior, believed that all people carry within them a shared layer of psyche, something universal that connects every mind to an ancient reservoir of images and ideas. He called this the collective unconscious, though the phrase itself can sound heavier than it feels. In truth, the idea is more delicate, like discovering a library inside yourself where many of the books were written long before you were born. Imagine walking into such a library. The air is quiet, filled with the scent of old paper and something faintly familiar, something you cannot quite name. The shelves stretch endlessly in every direction, and the volumes resting on them contain stories from every corner of the world. Some are tales from distant cultures, others are myths told around fires that have long since gone cold. And yet, as you wander through the rows, you begin to notice patterns, characters that repeat themselves, themes that echo one another, symbols that appear again and again no matter where the story comes from. There is always a hero who embarks on a difficult journey. There is always a wise figure who offers guidance. There is always a shadow, a darker hidden force that must be faced. There are cycles of birth, struggle, transformation, and renewal. These motifs feel strangely familiar, as though you've encountered them before, even if you've never read the stories directly. That feeling is the quiet touch of what Jung believed we all carry inside, a shared set of symbolic patterns shaped by the experiences of countless generations. What makes this idea so gentle and compelling is that you don't need to study mythology to feel its presence. It already lives in your dreams. You may have dreamt of wandering through a forest, or trying to climb a staircase that seems impossibly steep. You may have dreamt of light shining through a doorway, or of falling endlessly through open air. These are not random inventions of the sleeping mind. They are the shapes and movements of the dream library rising to the surface, like old stories retold in new languages. Jung noticed that people from vastly different cultures, who had never met or exchanged stories, often dreamed with similar symbols. A child in one hemisphere might dream of the same chasing shadow that frightened a child on the other side of the world. A wanderer in the mountains could dream of a glowing figure offering silent guidance, just as a sailor crossing an ocean centuries earlier might have imagined a guiding star. These patterns do not arise because the mind copies them from the world outside. They come from something shared, a psychic inheritance that drifts quietly beneath conscious thought. But why would humans share such deep symbolic roots? One way to understand it is through the lens of the body. Human brains are built from the same structures, shaped by the same evolutionary pressures, carrying forward the same basic needs to survive, to understand, to connect. Just as all hearts beat in a similar rhythm, all minds carry similar emotional landscapes: fear, longing, hope, curiosity. They are woven into us at levels older than language. So when we dream, when we imagine, when we create stories, these emotions shape themselves into familiar forms. The images we produce may differ in their details, but their essence remains the same. You can see this shared dream library not only in the world of sleep, but also in the stories humans have told for thousands of years. Every culture has a creation myth, a tale of how the world began. Every culture speaks of heroes who journey into darkness, sometimes a cave, sometimes an ocean, sometimes the depths of one's own heart, and return transformed. Every culture imagines beings of great wisdom, mysterious forces and realms beyond ordinary sight. These are not coincidences. They are reflections of the same deep-rooted structures in the human mind. Even in modern life, these archetypes continue to guide us gently. The movies that resonate most deeply with people often follow patterns as old as storytelling itself. The characters who stay with us feel like echoes of something we've always known. We don't love these stories because they are new. We love them because they tap into something ancient and familiar. This doesn't mean that our lives are predetermined or that we are trapped in old patterns. Instead, it suggests that our minds speak a universal language beneath the surface, one made not of words, but of images, emotions, and symbolic movements. When you dream, you're not merely watching random scenes flicker across your mind. You're participating in a dialogue with this deeper language, even if you don't notice it. And this is where the idea of a shared dream begins to shimmer. If so many people across so many cultures share the same symbolic roots, then perhaps we're all dreaming through similar lenses, shaped by the same inner architecture. Even your waking thoughts might be influenced by this collective library. When you face uncertainty and imagine a path forward, you might picture yourself like the hero of a story. When you encounter someone who challenges you, you might sense a shadow version of yourself reflected in them. These archetypal images guide your feelings and decisions, quietly shaping your inner world. It's comforting in a way to know that the strange dream you had last night might contain symbols that countless others have dreamt before. You're not alone in the forest or in the falling or in the endless search for light. The library is shared. The symbols are shared. Humanity moves through this inner world together, even when its members walk separate paths. If you feel your thoughts drifting, let them drift gently. We are moving slowly, easing deeper into this dreamlike landscape. When you're ready, we can continue toward the moments when these shared symbols begin to echo across real life, through coincidences, synchronicities, and the strange feeling that the world sometimes speaks back to us. There are moments in life that arrive with such quiet precision that they make you pause, moments that seem too perfectly timed, too gently aligned to be dismissed as mere chance. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and just as the thought settles, your phone lights up with their message. You dream of the place you've never visited, and the next day you see its name printed on the back of a passing truck. You hum a forgotten tune and then hear it drifting from a nearby window. These moments feel like little taps on the shoulder from the universe, as if something just behind the curtain is nudging your attention, whispering, "Look closely. This one is for you." Carl Jung gave these moments a name, synchronicity. To him, it was not a magical force, nor a supernatural sign carved by invisible hands. It was more like a bridge, an elegant, mysterious connection between what happens inside you and what happens outside. In his view, synchronistic events occur when an inner state, such as a thought or emotion, aligns with an external event in a way that feels meaningful, though not caused by one another in any physical sense. The key word here is meaningful. A coincidence might simply be chance, but a synchronicity feels significant, as if your inner world and the outer world briefly harmonize their rhythms. You've likely felt this before. Maybe you were wrestling with a question, unsure which path to take, when you overheard a stranger saying something that sounded like an answer. Or perhaps a symbol that appeared in a dream resurfaced in waking life the very next day. The feeling that washes over you in these moments is subtle, half wonder, half curiosity, as if the world has acknowledged you, softly and without fanfare. From a scientific perspective, these coincidences can be explained as patterns your mind is exceptionally good at recognizing. The human brain is wired to seek relationships, to find meaning, to connect dots, even when the lines between them might not be visible. There is nothing unusual about that. It is simply how you make sense of life, how you navigate a world full of possibilities. But what makes synchronicity so captivating is that it feels different from ordinary pattern recognition. It carries emotional weight. It arrives not randomly, but at moments that matter to you personally. Jung believed this emotional resonance mattered deeply. He saw synchronicity as rising from the collective unconscious, the shared dream library we explored earlier. According to him, the symbols that shape our dreams also shape our waking interpretations. When a symbol from that deeper layer appears both inside and outside you at the same moment, it creates a kind of convergence. An inner image and an outer event meet, like two currents touching in the same ocean. The significance you feel is a natural response to this meeting, not a mistake or a misinterpretation. Modern psychology offers another gentle perspective. It suggests that your mind is constantly scanning for meaning, especially during times of uncertainty or emotional transition. When you're searching for direction, your awareness becomes more open, more sensitive to cues you might otherwise overlook. A line in a book, a few words on a billboard, even the timing of a song on the radio can feel like guidance. It's not that the world is speaking to you literally. It's that your mind is speaking to you through the world. The meaning arises from the conversation between your inner state and your surroundings. But there's also something beautifully human about treating these moments with curiosity rather than skepticism. Synchronicities remind us that we are connected to our own emotions, to our memories, to the people we care about. They remind us that life often contains patterns we only notice when we slow down enough to see them. And even if these patterns are not orchestrated by anything outside the natural workings of the mind, the feeling they bring can still be tender and real. In many ways, synchronicity is one of the first places where the idea of a shared dream begins to shimmer. When you experience a meaningful coincidence, it can feel as though the world has responded to your thoughts, as though something beyond you has acknowledged your inner state. And when many people at once feel drawn to the same ideas, the same symbols, the same kinds of stories, as happens during cultural shifts or collective emotional moments, it can feel like entire communities are dreaming together. History is filled with such moments, times when societies undergo sudden change, when similar symbols appear in art, literature, and even dreams across different regions. During global events that touch millions of lives at once, people often report a strange sense of unity, as if they are all caught inside the same emotional current. Shared fears, shared hopes, shared uncertainty. These feelings ripple across humanity like a collective breath, and within those ripples, small synchronistic moments can feel amplified, more visible, more meaningful. A gentle example appears in daily life. Think of the way certain ideas seem to spread across cultures at the same time, even before the internet connected us so closely. Philosophical movements, artistic styles, scientific discoveries. Often they emerge in different places at nearly the same moment, as if the world itself were drifting into a new chapter, and many people sensed it simultaneously. Scientists may call this multiple discovery. Jung might call it a stirring in the collective unconscious. For our quiet journey tonight, we can simply think of it as another way human minds echo one another without speaking. There is something soothing in imagining that your inner life is not an isolated island, but part of a larger landscape, one where small coincidences are like stones skipping across the surface, creating rings that sometimes overlap with the rings created by others. When your thought and the world's event align, the ripples touch, and for a moment the water feels still, purposeful, and connected. You don't need to decide whether synchronicity is real in a literal sense. It is real in the way a memory is real, in the way a dream is real, in the way an emotion shapes the meaning you give to your experiences. Its significance comes not from its cause, but from its effect. It slows you down. It makes you notice. It reminds you that your inner world and your outer world are not strangers. They are partners in a quiet, ongoing dialogue. As you sit with that thought, you might find yourself remembering your own synchronistic moments, those gentle alignments that made you feel, even briefly, as though the world was awake with you. When you're ready, we can continue deeper into the architecture of this shared inner landscape, exploring how the mind builds the self and why that self is far less fixed than it seems. There is a quiet moment, usually sometime between thoughts, when you can almost feel yourself watching your own mind, observing the way it moves, like a small lantern drifting through a wide chamber. You might notice a memory rise or a feeling shift, or your attention drift from one idea to another. In those moments, you become aware not just of what you're thinking, but of the presence that is doing the thinking. This presence feels familiar, stable, and unmistakably you. But what if the self you experience, this inner narrator, this character you inhabit, was not a fixed entity, but a model your mind constructs moment by moment? Modern neuroscience suggests exactly that, though it explains the idea softly, without diminishing the richness of human experience. The concept is known simply as the self model. Instead of seeing you as a solid core at the center of consciousness, The self model describes your sense of identity as something like a story woven by the brain, an ongoing representation created from memory, expectation, emotion, and perception. It is real in the way a reflection is real, vivid, meaningful, and intimately connected to you, but not the same as the object casting the reflection. To imagine this more gently, picture a candle in a dark room. The flame is steady, warm, and bright. But if you look at a nearby window, you see the candle's reflection rippling across the glass. That shimmering image looks alive, but it is shaped by angles, surfaces, and distortions you can't fully see. The self you experience feels like that reflection. It is a product of deeper processes, light bouncing off unseen layers of the mind. You are the candle, but the person you feel yourself to be is the reflection the mind holds up so you can navigate the world. This inner model of self is incredibly useful. It helps you remember who you are, understand your place in the world, and make sense of your experiences. Without it, life would feel like a formless stream of sensations with no center to hold them together. But because it is a construction, it can also shift, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, depending on your emotional state, your surroundings, or your memories. Think of how different you feel on a quiet morning compared to a stressful afternoon, how your inner narrative softens when you are safe or sharpens when you are uncertain. Notice how a single conversation can change how you see yourself, or how a memory returning unexpectedly can alter your mood. These shifts are signs that the self is not a static thing, but a living process. Your mind is constantly updating the story of you, adjusting it to match the world you're experiencing. Dreams reveal this fluidity even more clearly. In a dream, you might be yourself but somehow younger or older. You might find yourself speaking in ways you never would while awake. You might take actions that surprise you, or watch events unfold as if you're half character, half observer. Sometimes you become someone else entirely, or drift between bodies without confusion. This flexibility is not a glitch. It is the self-model loosening its usual boundaries, allowing your mind to explore identities without the constraints of waking life. And yet, despite its shifting nature, the self feels so reliable during the day. You wake each morning with a sense of continuity, a feeling that I am the same person I was yesterday. This continuity is not created by an unchanging soul or a fixed essence, but by the mind's careful stitching of memories into a coherent narrative. It is as if your brain is telling a story about who you are and updating that story in real time as new experiences weave themselves in. You're both the protagonist and the storyteller at once, though you rarely notice the dual role. The idea of the self as a model is not meant to challenge your identity. Instead, it invites you to notice how gracefully your mind creates a sense of me-ness out of countless moving parts. It also helps explain why humans across cultures share similar dream symbols, similar emotional arcs, even similar struggles. Because beneath the details of our individual experiences, the architecture of the mind, the way it constructs identity, responds to emotion and seeks meaning, is remarkably similar. Your inner story may be yours alone, but its fundamental shape is shared with billions of others. Once you see the self in this gentle way, as a transparent character shaped by deeper forces, it becomes easier to understand how we might all be participating in something like a shared dream. If the self is a story, and if many of our stories follow similar patterns, then perhaps the dreamlike quality of life comes not only from the world we perceive, but from the shared structures inside us that shape our perceptions. You might have noticed how quickly your sense of self blends with the emotions of others. A friend's sadness can cast a shadow inside you. A stranger's joy can lift your mood. A gathering of people can create a shared emotional atmosphere that feels almost like a single mind shimmering across many bodies. These moments of connection show that the boundaries of the self model are more porous than they seem. Your inner story is intertwined with the stories of those around you, shaped by empathy, memory, and the quiet exchange of emotion. In a deeper sense, you could say that each person's self-model is like a window opening into a larger landscape. We each look through our own window with its smudges, its angles, its unique frame. But the landscape itself, the emotional terrain, the symbolic patterns, the longing for meaning, is something we walk together. And if that is true, then the idea of a shared dream becomes softer, more accessible. It does not require us to imagine minds literally merging or consciousness, forming a giant network. It simply asks us to notice how much of our inner world is built from shared human patterns, how our dreams echo one another, how our identities shift in similar ways, how our lives often move along arcs shaped by forces older than language. As this thought settles gently, you may find yourself feeling a little lighter, a little more open to the possibility that your story, yourself, is part of a larger tapestry. When you're ready, we can continue exploring this inner architecture by drifting toward the quiet constellation of the default mode network, where much of this storytelling quietly unfolds. There is a gentle hum beneath your thoughts, a kind of quiet background presence that you may not notice unless you look for it. It flickers into activity when your mind drifts, when you're not focused on a task, when your attention loosens and your awareness begins to wander through memories, imaginations, and feelings. Neuroscientists call this constellation of activity the default mode network. But for our slow and dreamy journey tonight, it may be more soothing to think of it simply as the inner storyteller. This inner storyteller is active in the moments when you're not consciously doing anything at all. If you've ever caught yourself revisiting a conversation hours after it ended, or imagining what you might say in a future meeting, or returning to a memory you haven't touched in years, then you've felt the default mode network at work. When you lie awake at night, and your thoughts begin to drift like soft clouds, forming scenes and fragments of imagined futures, it's the DMN gently weaving those threads together. One way to picture it is as a dim room lined with shelves, some filled with old memories, some with imagined possibilities, some with questions about yourself or others. When you pause from the world, even for a moment, the inner storyteller walks along those shelves, pulling down a memory here, a worry there, perhaps a small dream or an unfinished thought, and begins to arrange them. It is not a logical process. It is more like a silent, wandering meditation that allows your mind to wander into its own depths. This storyteller plays a large role in shaping your sense of identity. When you think about who you are, where you have been, or who you want to become, it is the DMN assembling memories into a narrative. It gathers pieces of your childhood, the sound of your mother's voice, the time you stood in a classroom at 8 years old feeling nervous and brave at the same time, the heartbreak you didn't think you'd survive, the joy that made you feel weightless, and it stitches them together into a coherent story of you. It brings coherence to experiences that would otherwise be scattered, helping you make sense of your life as a continuous flow rather than isolated events. But the default mode network doesn't just tell the story of you, it also tells the story of others. When you imagine what someone else might be thinking, when you interpret the look in someone's eyes or try to understand why someone acted the way they did, the DMN is quietly working. It allows you to create mental models of other minds even though you cannot see their thoughts directly. This capacity, this mental simulation of other people, is part of what makes human connection so rich. You don't only observe others, you imagine them. You fill them with emotions, intentions, hopes and fears, just as you do yourself. This mental simulation can create a kind of soft harmonizing among people. When you share a moment with a friend, a deep conversation, a shared silence, even a simple laugh, your inner worlds begin to resonate in small but meaningful ways. This resonance is not mystical. It is simply the default mode network aligning your imagination with that of another person. You create an inner image of them, and they create one of you. Over time, these imagined selves begin to overlap, forming a shared emotional space where you feel understood, seen, and connected. This is one of the ways the DMN helps make reality feel shared. Even though each person is wrapped in their own private experience, the inner storyteller is always trying to map the minds of others. When you walk through the world, you carry countless silent stories about the people you meet, their joys, their struggles, their mysteries. You fill in their inner worlds with gentle assumptions, shaped by your own memories and emotions, and in doing so, you help create a shared narrative web, a network of imagined experiences that binds human beings together. This ability becomes even more striking when we look at creativity. When a writer crafts a novel, when an artist paints a scene, when a musician composes a melody that seems to speak directly to your heart, they are drawing from the same inner storyteller. And when you read that novel or hear that melody, something inside you recognizes it, not because you have lived the same life, but because your inner storyteller resonates with the emotional patterns within it. This is why stories from distant cultures or ancient times can still feel familiar. They touch the shared undercurrents of human experience that live beneath the surface of individual lives. Dreams are one of the clearest windows into this undercurrent. The default mode network does not sleep when you do. In fact, much of its activity remains, drifting into the dream world and giving shape to the scenes that unfold. It whispers fragments of memory, blends them with symbolic images, and places them in landscapes where the rules of waking life no longer apply. And while these dream scenes can be strange or disjointed, they often carry emotional truth. A dream about losing your voice may reflect a feeling of not being heard. A dream of falling might reveal anxieties about losing control. These stories rise from the same inner storyteller, who shapes your waking thoughts, simply freed from the constraints of logic and reality. The DMN also helps explain why human beings often share similar emotional patterns and symbolic themes. Because the underlying architecture of our minds is similar, the stories we tell ourselves have similar shapes. We all imagine future conversations. We all replay past moments. We all create inner images of people we love. And when we dream with similar symbols: dark forests, rising flights, deep waters, narrow hallways. Because the inner storyteller across humanity draws from the same emotional palette. This brings us quietly back to the possibility of a shared dream. If the stories created inside our minds share common colours and shapes, and if we constantly project these inner stories onto one another, then perhaps the boundary between individual experience and collective experience is softer than we think. The inner storyteller does not speak only in private whispers. It sings in a chorus that humanity never stops adding to. And maybe, in some gentle way, each of us is a chapter in a larger narrative, a shared dream that unfolds through billions of minds, each one creating and interpreting pieces of a story that stretches across time, culture, and memory. When you feel ready, we can continue drifting toward another layer of this architecture. How consciousness gathers itself into a spotlight, and why this spotlight helps explain why we do not literally share one mind, even as our inner stories echo one another. If you pause for a moment and pay attention to your own awareness, you may notice something very simple but very important. At any given time, only a small part of everything you could be thinking about is actually lit up in your mind. You might be aware of the sound of your breathing, or the feeling of your body against the chair, or the meaning of these words as they arrive one by one. But you're not equally aware of every memory you've ever had, every sound in your environment, and every possible thought at once. Instead, it feels as if there is a small mental stage, and only a few actors can stand in the light at any moment. This image of a stage and a spotlight is one of the gentlest ways to approach what some neuroscientists call the global workspace. The idea is that your brain contains many systems working in parallel, processing sights, sounds, memories, emotions, bodily sensations, all humming along quietly in the background. Most of the time, you're not conscious of them. They are like actors waiting in the wings. But when something becomes important enough, it is brought onto the stage and illuminated by attention. In that moment, it becomes part of your conscious experience. Imagine a dark theatre valley at night, with many small stages scattered across the hills. On each stage there is a single lantern casting light on whatever performance is happening there. One lantern might be shining on a memory, another might be lighting up the taste of your tea, another might be focused on a line of music stuck in your head. Each lantern belongs to a different mind, a different person, each watching their own scene unfold. From a distance, the valley glows with many points of light, but up close, no stage merges into another. The lights may flicker in similar rhythms, the actors may perform similar stories, yet the stages remain distinct. This is one way to understand why, even if reality feels like a shared dream, we do not literally inhabit a single, fused consciousness. Each brain gathers information from the body and the world, processes it in its own way, and then selects certain pieces to present on its inner stage. That stage is your global workspace, the place where information becomes available to you, where it can be reflected upon, remembered, and woven into your personal story. The fact that you have such a stage at all is part of what gives you the feeling of being a single, continuous self. The global workspace is also selective. You can test this easily. Try to listen carefully to the sounds around you, while also doing a difficult mental calculation and remembering a detailed childhood scene. You can move your attention quickly between these tasks, but you will notice that only one of them can fully occupy the spotlight at any given moment. The others dim into the background. This shifting spotlight is your mind's way of choosing what matters right now. It allows you to focus deeply on a conversation, a piece of music, or a task, even though many other processes are still running quietly in the background. Now, if we imagine all human minds as stages in that same valley, it becomes easier to see both separation and connection. On the one hand, each lantern shines only on its own stage. Your conscious experience is confined to the workspace inside your own brain. You cannot directly see the scenes unfolding in someone else's theatre. You can guess, imagine, and empathise, but their spotlight does not suddenly merge with yours. The physical separation of brains, the boundaries of bodies, and the specific wiring of each nervous system all keep consciousness individually anchored. On the other hand, the valley itself is shared. The stages are built from similar materials. The lanterns burn with the same kind of flame. The actors move in familiar patterns: fear, hope, curiosity, love, doubt. Even though each performance is unique, the scripts share themes, the costumes share shapes, and the emotions evoked in the audience are strikingly similar. This is where the idea of a shared dream gently returns. We may not share a single spotlight, but we share a landscape of possible stories. We inherit similar bodies, similar brains, and a shared world that nudges our narratives in related directions. You can see this when a group of people experiences the same event: a concert, a storm, a celebration, a crisis. Each person's inner stage lights up in their own way. One may feel joy, another fear, another nostalgia. Yet all of these inner performances are responding to the same external scene. The outer world acts like a script delivered to many theatres at once, and each mind stages its own version of the play. The dream is not literally shared as one experience, but it is shared as a common source material, a set of overlapping cues and symbols that every mind interprets anew. The global workspace also helps explain why our shared dream cannot be completely unified. For many minds to become truly one, they would need to share not just similar information, but a single, integrated stage. A single spotlight that gathers and broadcasts sensations, memories, and thoughts across many bodies at once. In our world, that does not happen. We can synchronize brain rhythms with music, align our emotions with others, and even anticipate each other's thoughts to some degree. But the deep integration required for a single consciousness is not present. Each brain maintains its own workspace, its own central clearing where experiences gather, and yet the feeling of being part of something larger persists. When you lose yourself in a group song, when a crowd gasps in unison, when a quiet understanding passes between you and another person without words, it can feel as though the lanterns in the valley are flickering together in a shared pattern. The stages are still separate, but the performances briefly harmonize. It is as if countless small dreams are lining up along similar paths, tracing out a larger pattern you can only glimpse from afar. Thinking of consciousness in this way allows us to hold both truths at once. You're an individual mind with a private inner workspace that no one else can enter, and you are also part of a larger tapestry of minds, each constructing its own reality from shared materials. The dream of the world is not a single, undivided vision, but a mosaic made from countless overlapping perspectives. As this idea settles, it leads gently toward another question. If each of us lives on our own inner stage, how do we manage to agree on a common world at all? How do billions of separate workspaces coordinate enough to create societies, laws, economies, and calendars that hold together across generations? To explore that, we'll drift from the quiet theatre of the mind into the larger spaces we build between us, the invisible structures that only exist because we believe in them together. There is a quiet and often unnoticed miracle happening all around you, every single day. It is not written in the stars or hidden in ancient books. It does not require special senses or deep meditation to observe. In fact, it is so ordinary, so familiar, that you may rarely pause to appreciate its strangeness. This miracle is the simple fact that billions of human beings, each with their own inner world and private mind, manage to live inside a shared reality that feels stable enough to trust. We move through this world with the confidence that the rules of society, the meanings of objects, and the rhythms of time will be understood in the same way by the people around us. But if you look closely, gently, you'll notice that much of what we take for granted is not built from physical materials. It is built from agreement. Sociologists Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman explored this idea in the 20th century, describing how societies construct reality. But this phrase can sound heavier than it feels. To understand it softly, imagine a small child watching adults hand each other small pieces of paper in exchange for food or objects. The paper has no inherent power. It is not edible, not warm, not strong, and yet everyone treats it as if it holds invisible weight. In time, the child learns the same rule, not because the paper changed, but because the child stepped into the shared dream of its value. Money is one of the clearest examples of social construction. A bill or a coin, or even a number on a glowing screen, is only meaningful because millions of minds hold the same idea about it. Without that shared belief, the object becomes nothing more than decorated material. But with the belief, it becomes a symbol that can move mountains, feeding families, building homes, shaping entire nations. It is a dream we agree to believe together, and through that agreement, it becomes real. You can see this pattern in many corners of life. Consider borders drawn on maps. From high above the earth, the land is continuous, forests blending into plains, rivers winding without labels. But from the ground, a simple line drawn in ink becomes a boundary with profound meaning. It decides which laws apply, which languages are spoken, even which identities people feel connected to. The line itself has no physical presence. It is a shared story, repeated so often that it feels as solid as stone. Calendars follow a similar pattern. There is no cosmic reason why a week should have 7 days instead of 6 or 8. The sun does not divide months or years into neat boxes. These are agreements, collective decisions made long ago that still guide our lives today. And because nearly everyone believes in these rhythms, they shape how we work, rest, celebrate, and mourn. Time itself becomes part of the shared dream, with the moments stretching or contracting not because of physics, but because of culture. Even laws, those seemingly immovable pillars of society, are social constructions. They exist because people agree they exist, because communities collectively enforce them, because we teach them to children, discuss them in courts, and weave them into our everyday expectations. If everyone suddenly decided to ignore a particular law, its power would dissolve instantly. Its strength does not lie in ink or paper, but in shared imagination and collective trust. Perhaps the gentlest way to understand this phenomenon is to think of society as a vast invisible server, a place where billions of minds upload, maintain, and revise the same set of rules and meanings. The server has no physical location. It exists in the space between people, in conversations, rituals, gestures, and habits passed from one generation to the next. You log into this server every time you greet a friend, follow a traffic rule, or celebrate a holiday. And because everyone logs into the same server, the world feels consistent. But there is something even more beautiful beneath these shared structures. They show that reality is not only something we observe, it is something we build together. Like dreamers who find themselves in the same landscape and instinctively begin shaping the scenery, humans create shared meanings that allow us to walk through the world as if we are all reading from the same script. Think about language. The word tree is not a tree. It is a sound, just air passing through vocal cords. Yet the moment you hear it, your mind forms a vivid image. Bark, leaves, roots, the rustle of wind through branches. This is only possible because your mind and the minds of those around you have agreed to connect that sound to that image. A shared dream, held in place by mutual understanding. And consider something as simple as queuing in line. There is no natural law that compels people to stand patiently in a straight row, rather than rushing forward all at once. It is a social rule, a gentle agreement that creates order out of chaos. Without it, small daily tasks would be stressful. With it, strangers coordinate effortlessly, as if they all know the same quiet choreography. These examples may seem mundane, but they reveal something profound. Much of what feels solid in the world is actually made of stories we tell collectively. Some of these stories are ancient, like rituals passed down through families. Others are modern, like digital identities or online etiquette. Together they form the dreamlike scaffolding that holds society in place. This does not mean that reality is an illusion in the sense of being meaningless or fake. Instead, it means that humans are remarkable dreamers, capable of dreaming together in ways that create real consequences. We build shared worlds from imagination, and those worlds become powerful enough to shape our lives. And when you look at the idea of a shared dream through this lens, it becomes less abstract. It becomes something you can feel beneath your daily experiences. Every time you use money, follow a law, celebrate a birthday, or speak with someone in a shared language, you are participating in this collective dreaming. You are holding up your piece of the world just as others hold up theirs. As this thought settles, you may begin to see the world differently, not as a rigid structure imposed on you, but as a living story that you help write. And when millions of minds write compatible stories, the dream becomes strong enough to stand upon. Whenever you're ready, we'll drift deeper into the quieter, more mysterious cracks of this dream. The moments when the shared world flickers, repeats, or bends in ways that make us question its shape. There are moments in life so delicate, so fleeting, that they seem to dissolve almost the instant they appear. Yet they leave behind a lingering warmth, like the last shimmer of sunlight on water. One of these moments is déjà vu. It arrives quietly, without warning. You might be holding a cup of tea, walking past a familiar window, or hearing someone speak a simple sentence, and suddenly the world around you feels as though it has been here before, not just similar, not just reminiscent. but eerily, unmistakably familiar, as if you are standing in a scene you once visited in a dream you cannot quite remember. For a few seconds, time itself feels soft. The present moment folds gently over something else, something older, something half forgotten. There is no logical explanation that satisfies the feeling. You know you have never stood in this exact place, in this exact way, at this exact moment, and yet your mind insists you have, whispering a memory that refuses to reveal its source. It is like hearing the faint echo of a song through a closed door. Déjà vu has fascinated human beings for as long as people have paid attention to the mysterious workings of the mind. Some ancient cultures believed it was a sign of past lives brushing against the present. Others thought it was a moment when the soul stepped slightly ahead of the body. In modern times, people often describe it as a glitch in the matrix, a moment when the dream of reality seems to stutter, as if the world is briefly replaying itself. But even the gentlest scientific explanations reveal something just as poetic. One idea suggests that déjà vu occurs when the pathways in the brain responsible for forming memories fire just a little too quickly. It is as though your mind labels the present moment as a memory before it is fully processed. The experience arrives, and instead of being placed neatly into your awareness, it is momentarily dropped into the shelf where memories are kept. When you look again, it feels like a recollection, rather than something unfolding before your eyes. Another explanation imagines the mind as a kind of orchestra. Normally all the instruments, sight, sound, emotion, memory, play in perfect synchrony. But occasionally one section comes in just a fraction of a beat earlier than the rest. This slight misalignment creates a feeling of repetition, a sense that you have heard this note before. The experience is not a true repetition, but a brief echo created by your own inner rhythms. Some neuroscientists describe déjà vu as a prediction overshooting itself. Your brain, always eager to anticipate what comes next, sometimes correctly guesses the shape of the moment before it fully arrives. When this happens, the moment feels instantly familiar, as if your mind has already rehearsed it. The sensation is similar to recognizing the ending of a sentence before the speaker finishes it, or seeing the shape of a friend's smile even before it appears. Except in déjà vu, this prediction happens at a deeper, more mysterious level, one you cannot consciously control. There is also the idea of the neural echo. Imagine that your brain processes a moment twice in rapid succession, the second instance arriving only a hair's breadth after the first. The two impressions overlap, creating a soft doubling effect. The present feels like a memory not because it is old, but because you have perceived it twice, with just enough separation for one perception to feel like a shadow of the other. Regardless of which explanation is closest to the truth, what makes déjà vu remarkable is the way it gently blurs the border between memory and experience. For a brief instant, the world feels layered, as if the present moment contains traces of another moment hidden within it. This is why déjà vu feels dreamlike. Dreams often blend places, times, and events without strict logic, merging faraway memories into scenes that feel oddly natural. When déjà vu occurs during waking life, you feel that same soft layering, two versions of the world overlapping in a way that defies ordinary understanding. You might notice that déjà vu happens more often when you are tired, stressed, or moving through unfamiliar environments. These are moments when your mind is especially active beneath the surface, drawing on memories and patterns to help you interpret the world. When the mind works harder to make sense of things, the boundary between past and present can become slightly permeable, allowing these strange little ripples of recognition to appear. There is something comforting in the idea that déjà vu is not a sign of error, but a sign of your mind's sensitivity. It shows that your brain is always searching, always connecting, always looking for meaning. Even in the smallest, quietest moments, it is weaving together the threads of your life into a tapestry that feels coherent. And sometimes, in doing so, those threads overlap. You catch a glimpse of the weave from a new angle, and for a moment, the pattern repeats. In the context of our larger journey, the exploration of whether reality might be a kind of shared dream, déjà vu is one of the softest hints. It suggests that the present is not always as firm as it seems, that time can bend slightly under the weight of perception, that memory and experience are not always cleanly separated. Déjà vu feels like a crease in the fabric of awareness, a moment when the stitching shows, as if the world gently reveals a seam you usually don't notice. And though science approaches déjà vu with careful curiosity, the emotional experience of it remains something deeper, something that speaks to the dreamlike nature of consciousness. It is one of those rare glimpses when the world feels layered, mysterious, and slightly more connected to something beneath the surface. As this thought settles, you may recall your own moments of déjà vu, how they felt, what they revealed, and how quickly they slipped away. When you're ready, we can continue into the other strange flickers and folds of experience, where the waking world occasionally shows its seams in even more curious ways. There are certain moments in life when reality seems to pause, tilt, or blink, moments that make you stop and wonder whether the world is as seamless as it appears. They aren't dramatic or frightening. They're small, almost playful, like tiny hiccups in the flow of everyday experience. You might lose an object you're certain you placed on the table, only to find it later in a place you would never have put it. You might hear someone call your name when no one is nearby. You might walk into a room and feel, for reasons you cannot explain, that something about it is slightly off, as if a detail has shifted quietly while you weren't looking. These are the moments people sometimes call glitches, soft breaks in the pattern of the waking world. Unlike déjà vu, which arrives with a warm recognition, glitches come with a faint ripple of strangeness. They are the shadows in the corners of the mind's vision, the moments that make you blink twice and ask, "Did that just happen?" Perhaps you've placed your keys on the counter, looked away, and found them on the other side of the room. Or you've walked down a familiar street when suddenly the atmosphere feels different. Not wrong, just subtly altered, like a familiar melody played in a slightly different key. Most people brush off these experiences without thinking too deeply. Life moves on after all. But in a quiet moment looking back, you may feel a small flutter of curiosity. Why do these moments feel different from simple forgetfulness or distraction? Why do they carry a dreamlike quality, as though the world briefly slipped out of focus? Soft explanations exist, and they are surprisingly gentle. One idea comes from the way the brain handles attention. Attention is not continuous. It pulses in small waves. Your awareness flickers from one thing to another, taking in snapshots of the world rather than a smooth, unbroken stream. If you become distracted at just the right moment, when you're shifting your attention from one perception to the next, you might miss a tiny detail, misinterpret a scene, or fail to encode a memory. When your awareness returns, the missing piece creates the illusion of something having changed between one heartbeat and the next. Consider a moment when you're walking while lost in thought. You drift into your imagination, perhaps replaying a conversation or planning tomorrow's tasks. When your attention returns to the world around you, you might realize you don't remember the last few steps you took. You know you walk them, but there is a gap, a small missing stretch of the path. The world feels slightly stitched together, as if two moments were sewn with a hurried thread. This is not a malfunction. It is simply the natural way attention works. Gaps filled by expectation, supported by memory, smoothed by the mind's quiet painter. Another gentle explanation involves something psychologists call autofilling. Your mind is exceptionally good at filling in missing information. If you misplace an object, your brain might momentarily assume it is where you last saw it, even if you moved it earlier without noticing. Later, when you find it somewhere unexpected, you experience a small shock. Not because reality has changed, but because your inner model of the world briefly diverged from the actual one. Think of it as two layers of perception. The outer layer, the world itself, follows its own laws. The inner layer, the story your mind constructs, follows yours. Most of the time these layers align, but occasionally, like two dancers slightly out of sync, they drift apart for a second or two. When they meet again, the reunion feels strange. Some people experience glitches as repeating patterns. They might hear the same phrase twice from a stranger passing by. They might see a car that looks identical to one they passed earlier. They might catch a flicker of movement in their peripheral vision that disappears when they turn their head. Everyday life is full of loops and echoes like these. They are a natural part of perception, a result of the brain's tendency to categorize and match patterns quickly. But the emotional response they evoke, the slight jolt, the sense of "that's odd," comes from the same place that gives dreams their strange beauty. Because dreams too play with the rules of continuity. You might walk through a door in a dream only to find yourself in a completely different building. You might see a person change expressions instantly, or notice that the room around you has shifted without warning. These distortions feel natural in dreams because your mind expects fluidity. But when similar distortions appear in waking life, they stand out. They remind you that your perception is not a perfect recorder of reality. It is a story your brain is constantly updating, correcting, and smoothing. And in the context of our larger journey, these glitches act as gentle hints that the fabric of experience is not as rigid as we imagine. They invite the possibility that reality, like a dream, can sometimes bend ever so slightly around the edges. Not in dramatic or supernatural ways, but in the subtle misalignments that occur when your inner world and the outer world briefly fall out of step. There is no need to see these moments as signs of something mysterious happening beyond the mind. Their beauty lies in what they reveal about the mind itself, the way it constructs reality, the way it fills gaps, the way it predicts the world before it appears. But if you find yourself drawn to the poetic side of the experience, you are not alone. Many people describe these moments with affection, as though the universe had momentarily winked at them. A misplaced object becomes a small mystery. A repeated sound becomes a soft nudge. A subtle shift in atmosphere becomes a reminder that life holds more strangeness than we often notice. What's most comforting is that glitches do not undermine the solidity of the waking world. They simply illuminate the artistry of perception. Reality remains steady, but our experience of it, like the dreams we wander at night, is painted with brushes dipped in memory, emotion, attention, and expectation. As you sit with this idea, you may recall your own tiny flickers in the fabric of experience, the times when the world seemed to blink, the moments that made you pause. When you're ready, we can continue to explore another curious doorway. The moment someone realizes, within a dream, that they are dreaming, and how that gentle lucidity might reflect something deeper about waking life as well. There is a rare and delicate moment during sleep when something extraordinary happens, something gentle, quiet, and deeply personal. You find yourself standing inside a dream, watching events unfold the way you always do, until suddenly a small awareness rises within you, like a lantern being lit in a dark corridor. You realize, with a soft and almost childlike wonder, I am dreaming. And in that instant, the dream changes. It does not vanish. It does not collapse. Instead, it becomes clearer, brighter, more alive. You gain the ability to move within it not as a passive observer, but as a participant who holds the pen. This moment is called lucid dreaming, and it reveals something profound about the mind. Most of the time, whether asleep or awake, you follow the story your brain presents without noticing its edges. But in a lucid dream, the edges glow. You sense the boundary between inner and outer worlds. You understand, however briefly, that the landscape around you is made of thought, emotion, memory, and imagination blended together. And with this awareness, the dream begins to listen to you. Imagine walking through a forest in a dream. The trees may sway in a wind you cannot feel. The sky may shimmer in strange colours. But once lucidity dawns, the forest becomes responsive. You can choose to run your hand along the bark and feel its texture. You can call out for someone and see them appear. You can lift your hand toward the sky and feel gravity loosen its hold. These actions are not magical. They are simply the mind responding to the new role you have taken as both dreamer and creator. What makes lucidity so remarkable is not the control it offers, but the clarity. The dream feels unusually real, almost more vivid than waking life. Colours sharpen, sounds soften, emotions expand. It is as if your mind, freed from external constraints, paints the world with richer pigments. This heightened vividness suggests that the mind is capable of generating entire worlds with surprising detail. When you touch a dream object and feel its warmth, or hear a voice that carries emotion, you're witnessing the creative power of your inner storyteller without the distractions of the outside world. For those who experience lucid dreaming often, there is a gentle pattern to how it begins. Sometimes it starts with a tiny inconsistency, a clock that shows different times each time you glance at it, or a sentence in a book that rearranges itself. Sometimes it happens when you see someone who should not exist in your life anymore, a loved one who has passed, a friend from childhood. The emotional shock of recognition nudges the mind awake within the dream. At other times, lucidity rises simply from the feeling that something isn't quite right, a whisper from the deeper parts of your consciousness. Scientists studying dreams have noted that lucid dreaming often occurs when certain areas of the brain become active during sleep, regions associated with self-awareness, reflection, and decision-making. Normally these regions rest while you dream, allowing the mind's creative networks to roam without the organizing influence of logic. But when self-awareness sparkles to life, it brings a small piece of waking consciousness into the dream, creating a bridge between two states that usually remain separate. And this bridge is where our exploration becomes especially meaningful. If awareness can grow inside a dream, if the dreamer can wake up within the dream without leaving it, then perhaps there is something similar waiting to be discovered in waking life. Just as lucidity allows you to realize, I am dreaming right now. There are moments during the day when a quiet clarity arises. You might notice yourself reacting automatically to a situation and suddenly step back, watching your own emotions with gentle detachment. You might catch yourself drifting through routines and then become fully present, as though a veil is lifted. These are small awakenings, micro-lucidities in the dream of everyday life. They do not change the physical world, but they shift something internal. You become aware of the story you're telling yourself, the assumptions you carry, the roles you play without thinking. In that awareness, you gain a soft kind of freedom, the freedom to choose your response, to rewrite a small part of your narrative, to step out of old patterns. It is not dramatic or grand. It is subtle, like adjusting the angle of a lantern so the light falls differently on a familiar room. Many spiritual traditions have used lucid dreaming as a metaphor for enlightenment or awakening. Not awakening in the sense of leaving the world behind, but awakening within the world, recognizing the fluid nature of your thoughts, the constructed nature of your identity, the gentle illusion of permanence woven into everyday experience. When you become lucid in a dream, you are not leaving the dream. You're staying within it but relating to it differently. The same idea appears in the waking world. Awareness does not erase reality, but enriches it. This parallel invites a soft and comforting possibility. If waking life shares some of the architecture of dreaming, if perception is constructed, if identity is fluid, if awareness can shift the texture of experience, then perhaps waking life too has layers that become visible only when you look closely. Lucid dreaming becomes a small model for how the mind interacts with its own creations, and it whispers a question. What happens if more moments of lucidity arise while you are awake? This does not mean that the physical world bends to your will, as it sometimes does in a dream, but your relationship to the world can shift. You may find yourself moving through life with more gentleness, more intention, more curiosity. You might see the narratives you once accepted automatically and realize you can shape them. You might discover that awareness itself is a quiet kind of power, not to control the world, but to understand your place within it more deeply. In the context of our journey into the idea of a shared dream, lucid dreaming offers a glimpse of how individual consciousness can momentarily transcend its usual boundaries. It shows us that the mind is capable of awakening within its own creations, of observing them with clarity, of shaping them with intention. And if each of us carries this capacity inside our private dreams, perhaps we also carry it within the shared dream we inhabit together. When you feel ready, we can continue toward the next delicate doorway. Those near-death experiences that so many describe as glimpses beyond the dream, moments when consciousness brushes against something bright and vast. There is a kind of stillness that surrounds certain moments in life, moments when everything seems to pause, when the world narrows into a thin beam of awareness, and when the familiar boundaries of perception begin to loosen. Near-death experiences, often called NDEs in gentle conversation, belong to this delicate realm. They are rare, deeply personal moments reported by people who came close to the edge of life and returned with stories that feel both intimate and mysterious. What makes these experiences so striking is the consistency with which certain themes appear across cultures, ages, and circumstances. A person might describe moving through a narrow corridor or tunnel, drawn toward a soft, expanding light. Another might speak of a sudden, overwhelming sense of peace, as though every worry they ever held had dissolved in an instant. Others recall watching their life play out before them, not as a series of disconnected memories, but as a flowing, emotional tapestry that revealed the meaning behind certain events they had never understood before. These motifs appear again and again, whispered by people from different countries, different beliefs, different eras. The tunnel, the light, the weightlessness, the panoramic memory, the feeling of being welcomed or watched over, the sense of stepping out of one story and glimpsing the edges of another. Whether interpreted spiritually, psychologically, or neurologically, these experiences touch something deep in the human imagination. In moments like these, the mind seems to shift into a different mode of awareness. Neuroscience offers several gentle explanations, none of which diminish the beauty of the experience. One suggests that when the brain is deprived of oxygen, as can happen during cardiac arrest or trauma, certain regions related to vision and memory become highly active. Instead of fading into darkness, the visual field may contract into a bright tunnel-like pattern, a natural consequence of the way neurons fire when under stress. The expanding light in this view is not a literal door opening, but the final flicker of the mind's visual circuitry. Another explanation points to the release of memory networks. In times of extreme distress, the brain may rapidly activate pathways that normally remain quiet. This surge of activity can produce vivid, emotionally rich memories, what some describe as a life review. Instead of recalling moments one by one, the mind may weave them into a sweeping emotional landscape, showing not just what happened, but how it felt, and perhaps even how those moments shaped one another. There is also the possibility that NDEs reflect a shift in the balance between different systems of the brain. When the usual sensory input is disrupted, when the outside world fades away, the mind may turn inward, drawing on deeper layers of experience. This can produce a sense of peace or unity, as though the self is dissolving into something larger. It may feel like floating, rising, or being held by something gentle and expansive. From a neurological perspective, this could be the brain reducing the boundaries of its self-model. But from the inside, it feels like touching something luminous. And then there is the question of perspective. Many people describe leaving their bodies, watching medical staff work on them from above, or observing the scene from a vantage point they would not have had while unconscious. Scientists often explain these experiences as the brain constructing a viewpoint based on memory and imagination, much like it does in dreams. The mind, deprived of sensory information, may create a visual scene based on what it expects or understands about the situation. But those who have lived through it often insist that it felt undeniably real, as if they had stepped outside themselves. No matter how softly we approach these explanations, one truth remains: NDEs, whether biological or beyond, leave a profound imprint. Many people who experience them return with a changed relationship to life. They speak of feeling less afraid, more connected, more aware of the preciousness of each moment. Some describe the world as softer, as though they've glimpsed the thinness of the boundaries we take for granted. Others feel as if they've woken from a long, deep dream, grateful for another chance to see the world through new eyes. In the context of our journey tonight, the exploration of whether reality might be a kind of shared dream, NDEs offer a poetic point of reflection. They reveal how easily the mind can shift into a different mode of experience, how perceptions can transform dramatically, and how consciousness may continue creating stories even when the body is in crisis. Whether interpreted spiritually or scientifically, these moments suggest that awareness has layers we seldom explore. It's also worth noting how similar NDEs are to certain dream states. The floating sensation, the feeling of moving through a corridor, the presence of light, the sense of being guided or observed. These appear in many lucid dreams and symbolic dream sequences. The mind seems to rely on these images as metaphors for transition, transformation, or emotional release. Perhaps, in the most vulnerable moments of life, the mind returns to the same symbolic library it uses when dreaming. Perhaps it reaches for the imagery that feels safest, clearest, most reassuring: light, warmth, movement, connection. This does not mean NDEs are just dreams. It simply highlights how the mind draws from the same vocabulary across different states of consciousness. The tunnel becomes a way of representing passage. The light becomes a symbol of clarity, peace, or acceptance. The floating becomes a release from the weight of fear. These images bridge the worlds of dreaming and waking, suggesting that our deepest experiences share a common architecture. And even if we take the most grounded interpretation, that NDEs emerge from the mind's final bursts of activity, the experience itself is undeniably meaningful. Meaning is not diminished by mechanism. A sunset does not lose its beauty when we understand how light scatters in the atmosphere. A dream does not lose its emotional power when we understand where it comes from. And an NDE does not lose its significance because we can describe the biology behind it. It remains a moment when consciousness brushes against the limits of its understanding, offering a kind of perspective that is both humbling and profound. As you let these thoughts settle, consider how these experiences, rare, mysterious, fragile, invite us to look at life differently, to treat each moment with a little more gentleness, a little more awe. And when you're ready, we'll move toward the final part of our journey, where we reflect on what it might mean if reality is, in some quiet way, a dream we build together. There is a quiet moment, often in the late hours of the night, when the world grows still enough for questions to rise, questions that feel too delicate to approach during the rush of the day. And one of the most tender of these questions is what it might mean if the reality we live in is not a rigid structure, but something more like a dream shared among billions of minds. Not a dream in the sense of fantasy or illusion, but a dream in the sense of a story we help shape, a world we interpret and co-create through our thoughts, emotions, and connections. If this idea is true even in the softest sense, then what does it say about free will, about responsibility, about how we move through the world? The answers do not need to be grand or absolute. They can be as gentle as the idea itself, quiet reflections that give shape to a new way of seeing. To begin, imagine the shared dream as a vast landscape stretching beyond sight. Each person walks across it carrying their own lantern of awareness. The glow from each lantern illuminates a small circle around them, what they notice, what they feel, what they believe. These circles overlap with the lanterns of others, forming shared spaces of agreement. Languages we understand, customs we follow, stories we inherit. If reality is a shared dream, then free will is the way you move your lantern through this landscape, the paths you choose, the directions you turn, the things you decide to look at closely or ignore. Free will becomes less about control over the world and more about the gentle choices you make inside the world, how you interpret the moments that arise, how you respond to others, how you shape your own inner story. If reality is partly constructed from perception, then the way you see the world matters. It's like tinting the lens through which light passes. Two people can look at the same situation and see entirely different possibilities, not because the world changed, but because their inner lanterns cast different hues across it. This idea brings a soft kind of empowerment. You may not be able to control the events that unfold around you, but you can influence the way they settle into your life. You can choose compassion over cynicism, patience over frustration, curiosity over assumption. These choices ripple outward, gently altering the shared sections of the dream where your lantern overlaps with others. A single act of kindness, for example, can soften the dream for someone else in ways you may never fully see. A harsh word can harden it. The world responds not only to what you do, but to the way you hold yourself. This isn't to say that the dream is easy to shape. The shared parts of reality, society, culture, history, are made from the overlapping lanterns of countless people. But even within that vastness, individual influence matters. You've probably felt this yourself. A conversation with someone kind can change the tone of an entire day. A moment of understanding can resolve a conflict that felt immovable just minutes before. Awareness makes these shifts possible. It is the difference between acting on autopilot and acting with intention. If reality is a shared dream, then personal responsibility becomes something gentle rather than burdensome. Instead of feeling responsible for the entire landscape, you realize that your task is to tend the small circle illuminated by your lantern, to keep your thoughts clear, your actions thoughtful, your presence attentive. This is not about perfection. It is about participating consciously in the shared story rather than drifting through it unknowingly. It also means recognizing that everyone else is walking with their own lantern, shaped by memories, fears, hopes, and experiences you will never fully know. When someone behaves in a way that confuses or hurts you, it may help to imagine the landscape they're seeing. Perhaps their lantern is dim tonight. Perhaps the path behind them was hard. Perhaps their inner storyteller is struggling to stitch their world into something that makes sense. This perspective doesn't excuse harmful actions, but it softens the edges of judgment. It allows empathy to rise where frustration might have settled. On the other hand, if reality is a shared dream, then your awareness can expand the dream for others. When you listen deeply, you widen the space between your lanterns. When you show patience, you calm the atmosphere around you. When you share your joy, your curiosity, your sense of wonder, you brighten the dream not only for yourself, but for the people whose paths cross yours. Even small acts can shift the emotional weather of a room. There is also a comforting implication in the idea of the shared dream. It suggests that meaning is not something you must discover carved into stone. Meaning is something you participate in creating. You're not simply an observer of life, but a co-author, weaving your experiences into a story that feels coherent and purposeful. When life feels confusing or chaotic, this perspective offers a soft reassurance. The dream is ongoing, and your place within it is still unfolding. In a shared dream, certainty becomes less important than curiosity. The world becomes less about fixed answers and more about gentle exploration. Instead of asking, "What is the truth?" you might ask, "How does this truth appear through different lanterns?" Instead of searching for the single right path, you might ask, what path feels aligned with the story I want to tell? Awareness becomes a compass rather than a map. And perhaps the most tender implication is this: if reality is a shared dream, then connection is not an accident. It is part of the architecture of experience. Every time you form a bond with someone through love, friendship, shared struggle, or shared joy, you are creating a bridge between lanterns, allowing your worlds to merge, however briefly. These moments are not just emotionally meaningful, they are structural, they shape the dream. Hold this idea gently. Every conversation, every small kindness, every shared silence, every act of understanding becomes a stroke in the painting of the shared world. You may not see the full image, but you help paint it. You help shape the dream. And when you are ready, we will move toward the soft conclusion of our journey, the question of how to live gently, attentively, and awake within a world made of stories. There comes a moment, often near the end of a long reflection, when the mind begins to settle like dust, drifting slowly to the floor. The ideas that once sparkled brightly now glow with a softer light, and the question shifts from what is the nature of reality to something more intimate. How should I live within it? If our world is shaped by perception, if our minds are storytellers, and if our experiences overlap like dreams shared through language and emotion, then how do we move gently through such a delicate landscape? To explore this, imagine the world as a vast field just before dawn. The sky's blue-grey, the earth cool beneath your feet, and the first hints of sunlight stretch across the horizon. Everything is quiet. The field seems endless. Each step you take creates a soft ripple in the dew-covered grass. You're not alone. Other travellers move through the field too, each carrying their own lantern, each narrating their own story. Their paths cross yours in ways both subtle and profound. Sometimes they walk beside you for years. Sometimes they meet your gaze for just a moment and continue on. And sometimes, if life is kind, they walk with you long enough that their lantern becomes woven into your own light. If reality is built from shared stories, then each of us plays a part in maintaining its gentleness. And one of the most comforting realizations is that you don't need to control the entire story, only the small circle of reality illuminated by your presence. The world is too large, too full of other lanterns to shape alone. But you can shape the space around you. You can choose to walk softly, to speak thoughtfully, to act with intention. These choices ripple outward, touching the shared dream in ways you may never fully see. But they matter all the same. You might begin by noticing the stories you tell yourself. These inner narratives can be powerful forces. Some stories paint you as someone who must always rush, always achieve, always please. Others whisper that you're not enough, or that you must carry more weight than you can hold. But if you pause and listen closely, you may discover that these stories are not fixed truths. They are interpretations, shaped by old fears, inherited beliefs or habits of thought. You can adjust them, you can soften them, you can rewrite them slowly with patience and compassion. When you shift the story within, the world around you shifts as well. A difficult conversation becomes an opportunity to understand rather than defend. A long-standing resentment becomes a chance to practice release. A familiar frustration becomes a moment to breathe instead of react. Actions and events may not change, but the way you move through them becomes lighter. You become not just a dreamer of the shared reality, but an awakened participant, someone who understands the power of perception and responds with care. Living gently also means noticing the lanterns carried by others. Everyone you meet is walking through the same mysterious field, trying to make sense of their life using the tools they have. Their stories may differ from yours, their lanterns may cast shadows you don't understand. But beneath those differences lies a shared architecture of experience. Joy, fear, longing, hope. When you recognize this, even fleetingly, compassion becomes easier. You can forgive small mistakes, offer kindness where it is lacking, and extend patience where it has worn thin. This doesn't mean ignoring your own needs or losing your boundaries. It means understanding that we are all co-authors of this shared dream, and the way you treat others contributes to the tone of the story. A gentle word can soothe a frayed mind. A moment of empathy can soften an entire day. A quiet act of generosity can become a turning point in someone else's journey. These moments do not change the world in grand or immediate ways, but they adjust its rhythm, making it a little more harmonious. Awareness also invites gratitude. When you understand that much of what you experience is constructed by your mind and shaped by shared human patterns, you begin to appreciate the simple things with fresh eyes. The warmth of a morning cup, the softness of a familiar voice, the feeling of sunlight on your skin, the small rituals of daily life, cooking a meal, watering a plant, opening a window to let in the breeze, become gentle anchors in the flow of time. They remind you that meaning doesn't need to be cosmic or complicated. It can be quiet, personal, and beautifully ordinary. And perhaps the most tender part of this perspective is the way it reframes uncertainty. If reality is a shared, shifting dream, then uncertainty is not a flaw. It is part of the fabric. The unpredictable, the unknown, the unexpected. These are the spaces where new stories can unfold. Instead of fearing the unknown, you might learn to move toward it with curiosity, trusting that the lantern you carry will illuminate enough of the path for you to take one more step. As we come to the close of this exploration, think for a moment about the dream we share, the one woven from billions of overlapping perceptions, emotions, and memories, the one shaped by ancient symbols, modern stories, and the delicate rhythms of consciousness, the one that continues to unfold each day as people across the world laugh, worry, hope, learn, and reach for one another. In this dream, you play a part, not a small part, not a large part, simply a unique one, irreplaceable, gentle, unmistakably yours. Your choices, your presence, your voice. These are the brushstrokes you leave on the shared canvas of reality. You don't need to see the whole picture to know that your contributions matter. You only need to trust that each lantern adds to the glow. So perhaps the softest, most meaningful question of all is this: if this is a shared dream, what part of it will you choose to brighten tomorrow? And with that thought, let your mind rest. Allow the night to wrap itself around you. You are here and you are part of something vast and quiet and beautifully human.